From Flourish DX School, this is the Flourishing at School podcast. With mental health becoming a global priority, we are your partner for creating schools where students, teachers and school leaders feel good and function well, becoming the best versions of themselves and contributing to a flourishing world.
Welcome to the Flourishing at School podcast. I'm Tamara Lechner. Each week, my co-host Jason Banshee and I bring you the best practitioners, academics, and everything in between in order to inform best practice in whole school mental health. Jason, you're in Sydney. I'm en route from Vancouver Island to LA. What have you been doing to take care of your well-being in the last little bit?
Yeah, well, Tamara, I know for our listeners, it would have been another week in between podcast episodes, but it's only been an hour for us. So, you know what? I actually went and shut my eyes for 10 minutes just to give myself a bit of a mental break. And yeah, it was great.
Sleep, one of the most important ones. Me, I was going for hydration. So I had a little bit of ice water, and that's all I've had time for since we last talked. How about you introduce our guest, and we'll get right on with it because we both need to take care of our well-being today.
Yeah, well, this guest, I have interviewed on our other podcast before, and I know her quite well. Tamara, it's your first time meeting her, so I'd like to introduce Dr. Suzy Green. Suzy is a clinical and coaching psychologist and founder and CEO of the Positivity Institute, a Sydney-based positively deviant organisation dedicated to the research and application of the science of optimal human functioning in organisations and schools. A big, warm welcome to the podcast, Suzy Green.
I'm very excited to be here, Jason and Tamara.
Yeah, and glad. I can't believe the two of you haven't met before, so I'm glad to make this introduction.
Doesn't mean I haven't heard of Suzy's body of work, because I think she's everywhere that I look, and so I'm delighted to finally be meeting you and learning more about you and what you do.
Showing my age, Tamara. I've been doing this for a while now, but yes, your name was familiar too. So again, lovely to connect with you.
So Suzy, I know you quite well, and a lot of our audience will know you very well. But maybe in just a few minutes, you can give us a brief update or overview of your career today.
Yeah, fantastic. Left school at 16. Nobody in my family had gone to university, so it wasn't really expected of me, and then went to university as a mature age student. I think it took me 10 years and 2 children to finish my undergrad and then postgrad. I did a doctorate in clinical psychology. I was actually married to a psychiatrist, and that's what sort of got me into this field. And so I was working at the clinical area, I guess, for many years with very unwell people, and went to do my clinical doctorate and had the amazing supervisor, Professor Lindsay Odes, who now is the director of the Wellbeing Science Centre at University of Melbourne, who has always been somebody that a futurist could always see into the future. And so long story short, I ended up doing a welfare study on evidence-based coaching as a mental health prevention intervention, so that if we help people set and strive for personally meaningful goals, not only do we improve their goal attainment, we improve their well-being. And so I used measures of subjective well-being and psychological well-being. And so this was back in 2003. So it was the first Australian published study in the Journal of Positive Psychology, which is something I'm very proud of. And so since then, I taught at Sydney Uni in the coaching psychology unit for 10 years. I have honorary academic positions. I really am, in the true sense of the word, a pracademic. I love the science. I read it for fun, but I've worked with hundreds and hundreds of people individually, clinical counselling and coaching. I've done lots of workshops over the years, and I do lots of keynotes, and I absolutely love what I do. But for me, it really is that combination or integration of positive psychology and coaching psychology.
Yeah, and you work with corporates as well as schools, as you've said.
Yes, I should say. In fact, schools is the smallest part of our work, but I describe it as my most meaningful work. So I feel if I stopped work tomorrow or today, that would be the thing I'm most proud of, because it was never predicted, never thought out. And it became clear to me that it really was, in the true sense of the word, a calling. It became a calling, and I still feel, every time I've tried to get out, I have tried to retract myself a few times. I get pulled back in every single time. So, so there you go. And I had someone say to me recently, I just want to do pos ed. I'm not interested in pos orgs. And I said, well, the schools that do this well are interested in the organisational, because it is, as Jason very well knows as an organisational psychologist, it is an organisational change and development. That's what makes it a pos ed a program successful, is the organisational lens to it.
Yeah, no, I love it, Suzy.
Yeah, absolutely spot on, and I couldn't agree with you more. So before we dive into how you help schools and organizations do this, I want to go back to the question that I asked Jason at the beginning and ask you, what is something you do, something science-based, evidence-based, because I can tell that is, you practice what you teach. What do you do to take care of your well-being?
Yeah, I'm high on prioritising positivity, which is a construct that's been researched. I'm an outlier, and I have been for a long time. But similarly, I think that's what Jason said. I'm a big fan of napping. So if I can have a nap, I will have a nap. I've mastered the nap, so I don't need alarms. Like, I wake up after 15 to 20 minutes naturally. Unless I'm extremely tired, and then I would set an alarm. But I'm a morning person, so I'm normally up 5:30, and so I really benefit from an afternoon nap, which then gives me some more energy for the rest of the day. So I love naps.
My husband would absolutely be right on that with you, and so I want to get some advice, because I have not ever napped, and I know he would probably tell you that sometimes I look at him with like, oh, you need a nap in the middle of the day.
Yeah.
So,
My wife's the same, Tamara. My wife's the same.
So
Yeah.
she and I have a lot in common. And so I wonder if I want to start napping, and I'm like you, I'm a morning person, and so I probably could use a nap at the afternoon time. How do you start that? How do you get going on a napping where you wake yourself up? And
yeah, well, my napping career started when I was pregnant. I was only 26, and so I used to nap under my desk at work, actually. And I don't know, I must have just trained myself, but my mum also tells me that my grandmother was able to take what she calls cat naps, and my mum's never been able to do it either. So I don't know whether there's some inheritability, but I think if you do train, maybe start off with an alarm. And there's been, can't quote the research, but I did have a neuroscientist talk to me more about this concept of a caffeine nap, which is gaining. I'm hearing more people talk about it now. You have a caffeine just before you have the nap, and then the caffeine kicks in, and it sort of can wake you up at about the 15, 20. But I think the research, Jason might be able to confirm this, no longer than 20 minutes, I think, or you start to go into too deep a sleep, and then you get really groggy. And whereas if it's just 15 minutes, I wake up, I'm like, yes, let's go.
Yeah, that's right. You're talking about sleep inertia. So if you go down too deep into like your stage 4 sleep, then you can wake up feeling more groggy rather than alert.
Yes,
so,
exactly.
I wonder if we're thinking of teachers in the classroom. So when there's nap time with wee ones, if that's the duration that they use, or if even a 2-minute nap is enough to refresh a little one.
I don't know either, but I know with my kids, I'm a grandmother now, which is very exciting. And I said to my daughter, because her eldest, who's only 3, has started to not want to have naps anymore. And I said, I used to enforce rest time, even if they didn't sleep, because I needed the rest. So my kids would, I'd say, you don't have to sleep, but we're having rest time. So
Makes total sense. I'm a meditator, and Jason and I are different on that scale. He's a napper, and I'm a meditator. But I often say, when I'm teaching people to meditate, they'll say, oh, I'm not doing it right because I keep falling asleep. And I truly believe that if you need sleep more than you need a meditation, that is fine. Whatever works.
Absolutely. Well, in my first job as an intern psychologist, I worked for a psychiatrist, and I used to teach progressive muscle relaxation. So I also came across some research at that time, so it was a long time ago, but it can be, you probably know, Tamara, it can be even more refreshing than a nap.
The latest science shows that if you actually get yourself into a deeper state of meditation, it can be 4 times as refreshing
There you
and
go.
That's in new meditators. So that's not someone who's been meditating for years and years. They found that as quickly as 2 weeks of a regular short practice. So
yeah, well, I do mini, 10 minutes is my max, Jason. So I'm not a huge meditator, but I generally do a 10-minute one each morning.
good for you. So we've talked about naps and meditation, and I know this is not your sweet spot. So I wonder if for our audience, you might share a bit about what the key messages are, those themes in your work that you're seeing kind of across organizations and schools right now.
Yeah, well, I think it sort of comes from the solutions that we offer as well. So I absolutely believe in education because, people don't know what they don't know. And having worked with teachers for a long time now, I still remember the first school I worked with, and just there was a lot of gratitude, to be honest, from the teachers to be introduced to this type of content, because historically it was all about, the students or, their professional development, their technical professional development. So they'd never had anything for themselves, So for me, the education is a really crucial component. But as we know, there's, research varies, but generally less than 10% in terms of transfer of training. And so for me, when I really started on in coaching, there was a classic paper by Olivero, Koppelman and Bain, I think it's 1997. I've got this bizarre memory for research articles sometimes, that showed training alone versus training with coaching led to enhanced transfer of training. And so at Sydney Uni, we used to hand that paper out quite a lot. And so I realised that it really was the lever to transfer training. And that doesn't necessarily mean professional, formal one-on-one coaching, but a coaching approach or some form of, for me, coaching personalises and contextualises what you've learned, so because, again, schools invest a lot of time and a lot of money, and if they're not going to do anything with it, then that's really, that's challenging for me, because I love them to clearly be strategic and sustainable.
Suzy, can you describe to me what a coaching session might look like? I'm curious. I haven't seen that happen live other than kind of the solutions-focused Cooper Rider version of coaching. So I would love to know what yours looks like.
Yeah, and funnily enough, Tamara, I had the privilege of meeting David Cooper Rider many, many years ago when he came out to Australia, and I attended a workshop with Professor Anthony Grant, the late Professor Anthony Grant, who was my mentor and supervisor. And I remember Tony saying, we hadn't even got to morning tea, and we were in the front row, and he said to David Cooper Rider, "This is just large-scale solution-focused coaching," So and it is, in a sense. They're very, very similar. But I think it's really important at this point, and there's a classic paper, one of Tony's papers. I can't quite think of what the title of it is right now, but I'll make sure I'll send it through. But in this paper, he talks about the continuum. So, at one end is that professional, generally in organisations or even in schools, it's the leaders that would benefit from the professional external coach working one-on-one, but right through down to the other end, which is quality conversations. So Tony started to say that what we need in organisations is a culture of quality conversations. So in the work that we do, it goes across that full dimension. So we may do some one-on-one professional coaching with school leaders. There's also within the world of coaching or the profession of coaching now a big move to team coaching or group coaching, I guess from a time and a cost perspective. So we also offer that. But we have a 3-day Foundations of Positive Education program, which I've run with numerous schools over many years. One of the days is evidence-based coaching. And so it's for all staff to learn these basic quality conversational skills. We're not trying to turn them into professional coaches by any means. And this is where I guess I really reiterate for them. A lot of people think that coaching is about achievement, which it is, and it has been. But for me, it's always been about building a relationship, because on the basis of coaching are basic rapport building skills. And you cannot coach if you haven't got those basic rapport building skills. And if we think about, one of the most important factors on our well-being, it's positive relationships. So coaching helps with positive communication, positive relationships, high quality connections, psychological safety. So you can see how it's all connected.
So much so. It absolutely brings me back just to the whole PERMA model. And I'm always thinking relationships, you can look across all of the rest of the aspects of PERMA and go, well, without relationships, it's much harder to engage, it's much harder to accomplish. That sense of meaning becomes very personal rather than mattering, which goes to other people. And so that coaching not only helps to foster a relationship, but I think would also help teachers to learn skills for those difficult students that are harder to relate with, or even your peers in the staff room.
Yeah, and I think, from my understanding, is in pre-service education there clearly a move rather than the old school, technically old school, fill the student up with information using more of the Socratic methodology or, a coaching approach anyway. So I think there is a move towards that. But I think what we do is try and make it more explicit about how it can be used in a school setting across that full dimension.
I really like that. Do you ever bring parents into the mix? Because I've heard you talk about teachers and students, and I wonder how parents either witness this or participate in any way.
Yeah, it's been a tough one over the years, and generally what we hear is, it's the same parents that come to everything, which I think is possibly the case. I have had a few tips from schools or strategies that have worked quite well. One was that they actually, use technology to sort of broadcast, and I'm seeing a lot more schools do that now. So the parents, if they can't make an event, at least it's being broadcast so that they can watch it online. I myself have delivered a number of parent workshops or parent evenings when we've been working with a school. But one school we worked with, and I met Jason over in Western Australia, was Perth College, who I had the privilege of working with for about 4 years. And Dr. Deb Perrich, who no longer works there now, she's at Catholic Ed Western Australia, but she engaged the parents quite early on, and they created a bit of, I guess, a ripple effect. So then those parents then recruited, I think they all had to recruit so many parents each, and they built quite a much larger group. And when we ran a conference, which we did for a few years there, we actually had like a whole stream for parents in the end. We had a significant number of parents attending. But I think, they are often the missing piece. And I think schools really do need to think about being creative about how to engage parents.
Yeah, it always seems to be the difficult one. Yeah. We talk about the three-legged stool, parents, teachers and students.
Yes.
But, it's sometimes very hard to engage parents and get them interested and engaged in wellbeing stuff.
Yeah, although I had one school where the school had approached me and had said, we don't know anything about this, and this was pretty early days, but we've had our P&C approach us and said, we want positive psychology at this school and we're prepared to fundraise for it, to bring in a consultant to do some initial training. So, and, in my corporate work, every time I had the opportunity, I mentioned the work that we do in positive education because people love hearing about it. They love hearing about it. And you'll often have this, the scenario of a perfect example where I had I opened the workshop and I said, does anyone here, kids at a school where you're doing wellbeing or pos ed or whatever you want to call it? And this man said, yes, Suzy. He said, our daughter who's in kindergarten came home just last week and taught my wife and I about growth mindset. He said, we knew nothing about it, but she taught us, and so I'm really glad that you're here today. So we actually do have this bizarre scenario, and I know it's not in all schools yet. It will be eventually, but of children teaching their parents in many cases.
Maybe we need to get more explicit about that. Like, this is your homework, go home and teach your parents about this.
Exactly.
Hey, Suzy, you've obviously done a lot of different interventions in schools, and a lot of them have been successful. So can you maybe give our listeners an example of one of those things that you thought just went phenomenally well?
Yeah, I've had so many learnings over the years, as I think you do when you're working in this space. I think definitely coming from what we know around self-determination theory, autonomy being a core psychological need, I was aware of SDT from the very beginning. So that was always in my mind in our working training teachers, but also in our working with schools. So rather than mandating training, although it does seem to be changing now. In the early days when there was still a lot of cynicism around it, we used to start with a small group and make that voluntary, and then word would get around and then the next group would want to do it. But what I'm finding now is the schools we're working with, the principal in particular or the senior leadership group have done a lot of pre-work leading up to us coming in. And in fact, that's our recommendation now. And this came about because I had a principal that said to me, will you come and run a workshop with all of our staff? This was, it was when I was only doing it in groups, small groups. And I said, no. I said, I don't do whole staff because can be, negativity and cynicism, and it can really infect the group. And she said, Suzy, I'm telling you, I've been here 18 months. I've sat down with every single person in this school on a one-on-one, and I can tell you 95% of people want this to happen. So from then on, I thought, wow, that was very clever, which, she really built the relationship. She helped understand why she was doing it. And so people were much more prepared. So I think that's been an amazing learning for me as well over time. And I think the other thing that worked well, it was an early one as well, was where there was still, again, some cynicism from staff, but we did a pilot program in the boarding house. And then after that was finished, we actually had some of the students from that program stand up and tell the staff about their experience. And from that point on, things shifted really quickly when the staff could hear from the students the impact that it had on them.
Yeah, and sometimes they're the hardest ones to convince the staff of the value, particularly, over and above traditional curriculum of, literacy and numeracy.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I was at an evening of research at Geelong Grammar when I was there, and they had a student come back 4 years after he had graduated, and I captured him, and I show this almost everywhere that I teach, saying, I was the kid that went to the class and said, not another lesson on kindness, not another meditation, and I rolled my eyes. And the teachers are always saying, what do you do with the ones that roll their eyes? Well, this boy said, out of everything that I learned in my time at Geelong Grammar, this was the most important thing. It's the only thing that I still use every day. And for the teachers to hear that and to realize that, okay, yeah, he was an eye roller. In fact, he was the king of the eye rollers. And now he realizes how important this was. It's just that reminder, right, that when you're ready, then you'll get the lesson. And so you can't stop it just because you've got the eye rolls.
No, Tamara, could I build on that? Because I actually had the privilege of running a program for 4 years at St Paul's Residential College at University of Sydney. And there were a number of ex-Geelong boys that attended there. And one of them approached me after the first session and said, Suzy, I was in the first group, I think, I was one of the guinea pigs when Geelong started. And he said, to be honest, it wasn't great, he said, at the time. He said, but now listening to you and being reminded, he said, I have been using it, he said, but I've only just made that realisation now. And so then I tracked Charlie Scudamore down at a conference and I said, Charlie, I just want to share this with you just in case you ever doubt, that, did it work or did anything sink in? So I think, that's an interesting point, isn't it? The lag effect. I know there's a few different names for that.
Yes.
But I know in my early career, the psychiatrist I worked with, I'd been working with quite a tricky client for a while, and he'd said to me, Suzy, it's time for a therapeutic break. He said, we've done what we can. It's time to have a therapeutic break. And he said, and you just never know. You just never know, and you've got to learn to accept that and let go, of the outcome. Because as a naive young psychologist, I just wanted, all the positive outcomes. And you know what? I went back to that clinic years later to pick up some mail when I'd moved to Sydney. And here she was, this woman that, I won't go into detail, but it was a complete transformation from where she had been. And so you just never know, the impact.
Yeah, and we actually had a similar conversation with Hector Escamillo about that, and the value of measuring wellbeing at a point in time. And we're talking about it's actually more important to measure the attainment of knowledge and skills for wellbeing so that you can use them when you're ready.
I heard that, Jason, and I love that interview, and I love that perspective as well.
Yeah, so we can't let that deter us, I guess, by not teaching it, because people don't seem to either be improving immediately for their well-being or don't seem to be putting into action now. But if they've got that in their knowledge bank somewhere, they're going to pull it out hopefully at some point when they actually need it. So
exactly.
Yeah, that's a great story. But you would have tried a lot of things though that maybe didn't work so well, Suzy.
Yeah.
Can you maybe give our listeners maybe a pointer of where maybe not to waste their time, because it clearly doesn't work?
Yeah, I guess there's probably a few, but when I just briefly reflected on this question before we came in, the one that keeps coming to mind to me, particularly now even in my corporate work, was having worked with a school for a couple of years, and then we sort of had the final report. We were finishing up, we'd been there 2 years. They were doing a really good job. There had been a new principal that had come in the last part of the engagement, and she said to me, what do you think you've done well? And I said, I think we've engaged the staff pretty well. There's a curriculum, blah, blah, blah. And then she said, well, what else would you have done? And I said, oh, wow. And I reeled off a number of other things that I would have done or I would have done differently. I can't remember them all now, to tell you the truth. But the gem here was, she said to me, why didn't you say that to us? And I said, well, I did at the beginning. She goes, but why didn't you push us on that? And I said, because I was trying to be flexible and be aware of your needs and budget. She said, Suzy, we're paying you as an expert, as a professional. We don't have to take your recommendations, but we need your recommendations. And so I've never forgotten that. And I've not hesitated now in giving my professional recommendations, and I've learnt to accept if people decide to, proceed or not proceed, or, they have a different idea. But yeah, I'm not holding back so much anymore, which I think is a good one.
I think that's a good learning, and definitely something I've applied professionally as well. I figure if people aren't on the same page as me, it's not my job to convince them.
Yes.
And if they're coming in and they're half-hearted, they're probably not going to be a great client to work with anyway. There's enough people out there who need assistance in companies and schools that you find people who are aligned.
Absolutely. The other one, just while I think about it, is so our approach is we start with education of all the staff. Then we'll often do an additional positive leadership program for the leaders. So we go deeper on some of the psychological capabilities and what they mean for you as a leader. And then we have, which I do believe is the secret sauce, is what we call a POSED consulting/coaching. So it's not pure coaching, because we are actually consulting and we're sharing resources and knowledge and shared stories. And when a school usually will do the training, and then they'll either be the director of wellbeing we'd work one-on-one with, or we might have, say, a maximum of 3. I usually cap it at 3, so it might be the director of wellbeing, the principal, or the head of junior school. And then we work with them. Usually a minimum of 6 sessions over the first 6 months at least, to get some momentum for the embedding, And so what doesn't work well is when they say, oh, we can only have 2 meetings this term, When it does work well is when they immediately after the training, which is this principal I mentioned before that said, I've done all these meetings. The very next week she went and met with each department and said, right, what are we doing well? Let's map out everything that you learn in that workshop that we're already doing, and what creative ideas or what else could we be doing? So it's the momentum building on while that knowledge is still fresh. But yeah, and I'm much more strong in my recommendations about that now as well. And in fact, the team have decided that we're no longer doing just the 3-day workshop unless the school also engages with us with the consulting, because they're the success stories that we have are the ones that actually get the momentum and get moving with it, and pretty quickly.
Yeah, I think that's something that any consultants listening to this podcast should learn as well. And we've learnt similar lessons where, if they just want like a piece, like they want to pick, I just want to do that, but I don't want to do those things. And you go, well, actually, you need those things if you want this other thing to work.
Exactly.
You've got to push back as a consultant. It's not worth it.
That's absolutely right, because it is. And I heard Jill just speak on the previous podcast, which was brilliant, so aligned to the way that we work. Because it's your reputation that's at stake as well. So, yeah, I mean, clearly you want them to be successful, but we want, I guess the general narrative is that it's a worthwhile investment.
Yeah, absolutely.
It is, and if it's going to be an investment of money, it also needs to be an investment of energy. And absolutely. I think so often you hear the resistors saying, when is this going to be done? And the people who understanding it's never going to be done, that things are going to change and evolve, and there's going to be more to learn, and we don't finish well-being.
No, and that's the beauty of having, whether you call them, and I'm not attached to the term POSED by any means, so whether you have a POSED team, whether it's a wellbeing champion team, ambassadors, whatever the language is, we usually recommend that, particularly after the initial education, that there is a group that, ideally put their hand up to say they want to be involved, and it's for 12 months. And then people step off and some fresh people can step on, because you want to keep it fresh over time. And sometimes it's just not the right timing for certain members of staff to be on the committee. So I think that's been quite successful when we've worked with schools that have taken that approach.
I love that. And so building off that idea of successful, something I like to ask our guests is, if it worked, if you went in and the coaching worked and the teachers got on board and the students got on board and the momentum was happening and you came back to the school in a couple of years, how would you know? How would the school feel or look or sound different that would let you know, yep, it worked?
Tamara, that's a classic coaching question, don't you? You're a natural coach. So, and that's a question we ask our schools at the very beginning as well, given our coaching background. I'd say first up, you would know, you can feel it when you walk into a school. And that's actually something that I don't do a lot of work directly with schools in terms of the workshops. I still do a bit of discrete consulting here and there, but because I've got a team that help me. But when I go into a school or even a workplace, as Jason would know, I pay attention to how I feel, and you can feel it from the minute you walk in. You can feel the vibe. The lightness, whether people are approaching you, engaging with you, seeing if they can help you. So it's certainly a vibe. I'd say it's also going to be the language, because I think what we're now learning, and University of Melbourne, I think, have at least 3 PhD students working on wellbeing literacy topics at the moment. And it's something that I've learnt in our work over the years, is it's the language that helps change the culture as well, because you're introducing a whole new vocabulary and then the staff start to use it. So in coaching, we talk a lot about the ants, the automatic negative thoughts. And, I mentioned before, it's, less than 10% transfer of training. When it comes to the ants, I think it's like 95, 100%. Nobody ever forgets the ants. They love the ants. The kids love the ants as well. So I think you'd be hearing the language. People would be using the language. From drawing on my coaching, there'd be a very strong solution focus. So we implement solution focused coaching. So not to say there aren't problems, and we train people and provide them with skills on how to validate concerns, but then how to move to a solution-focused approach. So there'd be this solution-focused approach. And in fact, again, one of Tony Grant's last papers compared positive emotion induction and solution-focused coaching in a coaching session, given that we know from Barb Fredrickson's research that when you induce people into a positive emotion, they become solution-focused. That's what some of her research and Alice Eisen before her research found. But Tony's research found that it's more powerful with both. So you need positive emotion. So again, coming back to your question, you would want a positive emotional climate. And that's not to say, again, that there aren't times when things are tough. The school I've worked with at the moment that's had a horrendous situation in the last month. But yeah, you'd certainly be feeling some of that, lightness, and there would be this solution-focused approach. That's a few things. There'd be so many things, I think, that I could add to that.
Those are great hints that things are going well. If you're solutions-focused, if you're seeing solutions, you're still noticing the problems, but you're grabbing onto the solutions. And you're right, there is just an energy that feels different when you walk into an organization where people feel seen and heard and valued for their contributions. So you couldn't be more right on that.
And I think, again, just to highlight, in the workplace, we use a graph called the Wellbeing Engagement Framework, which looks at mental health and wellbeing on one axis from low to high, and engagement or goal striving on the other from low to high. And so for us, what the approach that we take, and particularly in coaching and positive psychology coaching, which is my area as well, is it's about wellbeing and performance together. So wellbeing should ideally, support performance, and performance, achievement, competence should ideally support wellbeing. But unfortunately, we've been seeing primarily performance, or in a school setting, achievement, academic achievement, or even professional achievement, to the detriment of wellbeing. So our focus is on how do we achieve both, have wellbeing and performance. And finally, we are being given permission to talk about this after many, many years. So it's a great time to be working in this space.
It is. And I think that's a wonderful way to wrap up this time together with you. Now, before we do, I want to ask you, is there anything else that you wanted to talk about that you didn't get the opportunity to speak about today?
No, I think, my hope has always been, as Jason knows, I've been talking about this for a long time, that coaching and coaching psychology, which is the underpinning science, which started here in Australia, in Sydney. It is starting to spread globally. I'd love to see recognition from the broader positive psychology community and positive education community to recognise just how powerful it is, and that it is in many ways the secret sauce to positive education. And I think we are starting to see that now. So that's sort of my hope for the future.
I love that hope. And I know I have always felt that was a missing piece. I talked a little bit at the last IPA conference in Melbourne with Gabriella Kellerman and her group Better Up, who were there at the time working with Marty and Ray Baumeister and I think Sonia Libomirsky. And they're working in organizational. I haven't seen it move to education, but I have had conversations with Gabriella and Duke from Better Up about, okay, how do we bring this to teachers? Because they're organizational and educational, and they need both parts of this. So I think you're absolutely right. We need to do what we can to add this to the things people talk about when they talk about organizational, whole school well-being.
Exactly. And I guess we've seen, historically, again, as I mentioned before, when I ask a school, what are you doing anything with coaching? Oh, yes, the leaders get coaching, but they haven't seen, we want to do POS Ed training, but they haven't seen how they're connected. So I think, again, we are starting to see that. And I have a number of publications and articles if anyone wants to read them at any point in time.
Yeah, and I know, Suzy, you've brought into the integrated model as well of mental health. So looking at the three pillars of intervention. And you wouldn't have heard it yet because Sue Chandler, we only just recorded with, and it's not out yet. But she's also, very much a proponent of using that integrated model as well. So looking at the organisational, the group, and the individual. Yeah.
Yes. Well, I think, Jason, as you know, you're the early adopter really of it, and been pulling us all with you, which is I've been very grateful for. But I've been presenting to a few educational groups just recently, and a lot of them are still not aware of what's happening in this space. Haven't really seen that relevance. But I think that model for us is just very powerful and yet simple model that I hope to see more schools utilise. And, of course, the promote positivity or promote flourishing is our sweet spot, but you clearly need all three.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's great to see, organisations like the World Health Organization and the International Labour Organization recently publishing, alongside or in line with Tony's original model, with the three pillars of prevent, promote and support.
Love it. Yeah, it's wonderful.
That it is. Well, on that note, we're going to wrap up this episode, but I want to encourage our audience, first off, to share this with their friends and certainly share all those articles that we've talked about today. You can reach out to Jason and Suzy and I on LinkedIn, and we are absolutely happy to communicate with you there and share more, because the more of us that are speaking this common language, the more impact we'll make. If you're not a podcast person, or if you know someone who would rather watch us, we are on the Flourish DX YouTube channel, and you can find all of our podcast episodes there. And until next time, keep flourishing at school and in life.
You've been listening to the Flourishing at School podcast. To stay up to date with the latest on whole school mental health, follow Flourish DX School on LinkedIn and subscribe to the Flourishing at School podcast at www.flourishingatschool.com.